everybody. Thank you again for joining us. This week, we're going to move right into the program for the today's session. And we will start again with our centering prayer before we get into the content of the program. Let's take a moment and rest in the presence of God. Heavenly Father,
where's the next one?
It's fine. Heavenly Father, we come before you with the foreknowledge that the lives you have granted us lead us through death to your gift of eternal resurrected life. You have given us the commandment to love one another as you have loved us. Through this love, help us to fulfill our obligation to our families through prayerful dialogue and these preparations. Be present, Lord Jesus, to contemplate our mortal nature with the assurance of your presence throughout our lives.
Amen.
Hold on, we're having a little bit of technical issues here. Give us 1 second. Together from the beginning.
It's not running. There's a slideshow. You stop sharing and start doing it.
Hold on, everybody.
We just have a little bit of a glitch happening. There we go. Oh, here we go. There we go.
The next one. Here we go. I am Reverend Deacon Paula Waite, staff chaplain at Beebe Healthcare, if you have not met me before. It does say that Dr. Sarah Matthews is my co-presenter to this week. She is out in Colorado, and so I am instead joined by my technical assistant and priest extraordinaire, Father Jeffrey Ross. I think you guys know him, which is a very good thing. We have gone through, we are on week 3. We've talked about advanced care planning in week 1. We talked about talking with your loved ones last week and worked through some of the skill set to make that easier for everyone. This week, we're going to be talking about end of life and also the Episcopal Church. Next week, as I mentioned in the past, will be a lot of information. Please plan for up to an hour and a half for that because there's a lot of information. And there are handouts with that will be very helpful to you as you move forward. Week 5 will be making and conveying legal decisions, and that will be with an attorney that Father Jeff has lined up for you guys. Sarah and I will be stepping back and going back into the healthcare setting. So I thank you again for joining us, and we're going to jump right in. And so we're going to talk initially about some terms as far as what terms are associated with death and burial. So burial services, we start out talking about cremation or burial. And the one point that we want to talk about is that even if you choose cremation over a traditional earth burial, you can still have a meaningful memorial service. It's very difficult. Sometimes you think that, well, if you don't have a body, you can't really honor them. But that isn't as true anymore. So don't feel like you can't go in a different direction. The disposition is a term used by the funeral industry that describes the handling of the deceased remains. And whether you choose cremation or burial, the body will return to its natural elements. And we're going to get really into that today. But the point is that when we leave this planet, we are going to return, just as we say every Wednesday during Holy Week, is earth to earth, dust to dust,
Dust to
ashes, dust to dust. So just know that the intent is always, no matter what we're doing, is to return the body to its natural elements. All right. We're going to start with talking about burial choices. So burial choices, first off, is the word intern. And that means an earth burial. Now that might mean a full casket, but it means that the body or its ashes are going into the earth. Entombed in a crypt or mausoleum is an above ground burial. So we don't have that here at St. Peter's. We have a columbarium, but we don't have a mausoleum or crypt. But all that means is with an entombment is it's above the ground.
And we've had a few people who bought extra plots and built a crypt or a mausoleum down at Paula Cemetery. And there are a couple here in the churchyard. But by and large, the expense is too cost prohibitive for most people to.
Right, exactly,
take advantage of.
exactly. There is also being buried at sea, and that might be scatterings of ashes or a full body submersion. Most people recognize that from naval officers. You see a lot of things where they slide the body off into the ocean. So that's another method, and we're going to talk about that because that is an option. And then there are eco-friendly options, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in depth after we talk about the other two alternatives, which are mostly common that we have heard about, which is cremation and burial. So why would you choose a burial versus a cremation? Well, it might be traditional in your family. You might have a family plot. You might want to be part of, just like here at St. Peter's, that there's a cemetery here and you also have other locations. It may be very important for that to be within your family environment. For myself, Tom and I made a choice. We were going to be cremated, and we bought a plot back in Annapolis, which is where I'm from. And now at this point, we're not going back there because this is here. So it can be a very difficult decision when you're making that choice, whether you want to be buried somewhere, because people now are much more mobile and they're not in the area. So that may be a problem. On the alternative, my in-laws had their plots up in Massachusetts and had them purchased, and my father-in-law is already buried there and my mother will be buried there, but most of the rest of his family are still in the area. So for someone in a family organization that they really want to be able to visit the grave, that may be very important to them.
And typically, most churches will buy back the plot if you choose to be buried someplace else. They'll buy it back for the amount of money that you spent to acquire the plot in the first place. For-profit cemeteries typically won't do that. Mm-hmm. And so you'll sometimes see people selling them in the classifieds of a newspaper and stuff. But for the most part, most churches will take that back and allow you to exchange. Here at St. Peter's, we've had people who were down planning to be buried at Powdertown, who, when we put the columbarium up here at church, decided that they wanted to be here. So they sold their plots down there and then bought the plot here.
Okay, excellent, good, excellent. Another choice for the burial is you may not like the idea of cremation because the idea of burning a body is just distasteful. And for some people, that's a very strict line and they can't get past that. You may also prefer to have the body slowly returned to the elements, and we're going to talk about that as we continue to talk about burial. But instead of turning a body into ashes and then releasing it, you may want it to happen more naturally, and we're going to talk about those options. Another, you may want to erect a monument on the grave, and that could be a headstone or something like that, that it's a location, a place to be. All right. And you may want to visit the grave in the days to come, and a graveyard is more appealing than a columbarium. And it's 6 of one, half dozen of another, right?
Choice.
Yeah, and that goes back to the values that Sarah and I have been talking about. So these are things that you have to think about when you're deciding between a burial or a cremation or one of the eco-friendly options.
It's important, though, to say that most mainline churches today embrace cremation as a valid option. So there's no reason to choose to be buried full body because somehow or another you won't get into heaven or something like that. Most Christian groups have progressed beyond that kind of restriction that you may remember from your childhood.
Yeah, there's not the stigma that there used to be.
No. Correct.
All right. If you choose a burial, there are a number of things that have to be considered. Within our state It's whether or not the body is going to be embalmed. And we're going to talk about the impact of that embalmment as we continue moving forward. You may, you'll have to choose a casket or coffin that will house the body. You can either, which is interesting to me, or was interesting to me, you can buy a casket, or rent one, or build your own, and which I find fascinating.
You can buy them on Amazon.
Well, wow, you can?
Yes, you can.
Okay. He's a wealth of information. Whether or not the cemetery requires a vault or a grave liner. And what that means is if there's a specific cemetery that requires that there's a vault, which means that the casket's within a housing product, and that's going to have some cost associated with it. All right. You're going to have to choose what cemetery. And again, I just use my example. I picked a cemetery, but we no longer live there. So that may be something to really consider as you make those decisions for your loved ones. And what kind of plot is it? What kind of grave marker you want, and what to actually put on the gravestone itself. And, you know, you guys here at St. Peter's, you've got a cemetery filled with history of people making choices to say what happened with that person and how they lived and how they died.
Yeah.
So that's things that you'd have to decide if you were going to go in this direction.
The main question for embalming is one that depends upon what kinds of things you want to happen after you die. If you want a viewing, then the body must be embalmed. If you're not going to have a viewing, you do not need to be embalmed. But if you are embalmed, the amount of chemicals that they pump into the body and all of that goes back into the earth, and it is very detrimental to the environment. As far as caskets are concerned, here at St. Peter's, we have a cemetery where we share with the Jewish community, and in Jewish practice and custom, everything goes back to the earth. So the caskets are made in such a way that they will also degrade. And most of the caskets that circle St. Peter's Church are made the same way. I've actually fallen into a couple of graves because after a while, the wood gets wet and it seeps, and the air pocket descends. And my first year here, I visited some former parishioners up to my waist and walking through the cemetery yard. So it's better for the environment that way, though. But modern custom, although St. Peter's doesn't require it, is to put the casket actually into a steel vault, which will never break down in our lifetime. And is much more, again, detrimental to the environment and costly.
They're very costly. And, you know, it's interesting because historically speaking, the only after death options that were available were natural ones in the history of the nation. But those fell out of favor, actually, in the United States with the rise of the industrial age, because embalming was created, and the professionalization of the funeral director as a career. So things shifted from a natural burial where things would degrade to having something that could be, back then we didn't think about what was going to impact the earth.
Yeah.
And so this is a historically natural means of putting the body away was different than what we have now. In recent years, many things have come up with concerns about the environment, and that has changed and triggered some differences. And one of those differences is cremation. So cremation is actually just the accelerated reduction of the remains to ash through the process of heat and fire. No casket is legally required. It was a little difficult for me. My niece died at a young age, and she was going to be cremated. And when we went to this was in Ohio, and when we went to the funeral home, we were shown to a room with a glass view like this, and she was in a cardboard box. And that was pretty hard for my sister because it was just, we were not ready for that kind of visual. But there is no casket required because it is going to be destroyed in the cremation process. Now, the remains can be stored by the family, or the remains can be supplied in a simple box by the crematory, and then it can be distributed, scattered over land or water. For me, my mom passed, as you guys know, my mom passed. She was very specific that she wanted to be cremated. and she wanted to go back to her childhood home in the Catskill Mountains of New York. We were in Ohio when she passed. We had a very simple box that was given to us that I traveled with on the plane and brought back. And for many years, my mom lived with me. And there was a joke in my family that she lived with me longer than she did with my sister, because I kept her for so long before taking her up to the mountains to scatter her ashes. So it gives you the possibility, if there's meaningful places, if there's things that you want to do. Another example is my father, who passed many years ago, and my stepmother supplied each of the children with part of his remains and allowed each of us to make our own choice how to honor him. So my father was a Naval Academy officer, and that meant something to him, and probably against the law, but I did put them into the water by the Naval Academy. My sister took him to a place where his parents were buried back in Cleveland. And my brother, he had a summer home where my father used to love to go, and he took him there. So it gives some flexibility and some meaningful stuff. And none of that is disrespectful. You know, I mean, it really isn't. It's really honoring the person and their influence on your life.
We recently had a member pass away who his wife predeceased him, and his wish was that they would be blended together, their remains. So she hung out in the altar upstairs in the chapel for several years, and then when he passed away, the family took her urn and mixed in their father, and then they were both interred together in the columbarium in the front.
And I will tell you that my conversations in the hospital, when I've talked to people, I mean, I have families and patients that will say, I'm going to be buried with the ashes of my dog or my cat, because it's meaningful to them, and those remains are put together. And again, that's not disrespectful.
No.
It's just honoring who they are.
The important consideration, though, is to be conscious of the size of the niche if you are going into a columbarium, or the size of the plot for the urn. I remember in the church I grew up, one of our oldest members, who was a 4-foot 5-inch woman, very small, diminutive woman. When she died, her family bought her a 2-foot by 2-foot urn of an open Bible.
Oh,
and it was huge. And they actually had to buy 4 plots to put the urn in for this little lady, because the urn was so big. Something that size would not fit in the columbarium that we have here or down at Pilot Town Cemetery. So do think about that when you're purchasing your urn.
Absolutely. Okay. All right, so, and it's good that you just brought that up, because the remains can be placed in a niche within a columbarium. It can be, the remains can be buried in the ground in a regular plot or a smaller cremation plot. For Tom and I, when we bought the plot in Annapolis, we bought one plot because we were both going to be cremated, so we could use one plot instead of 2 plots. All of these have price tags. All of these have price tags. And again, Father Jeff also talked about being entombed in a crypt within a mausoleum. And I think that's much more, you see that up in the New England areas much more so than we do down here for some reason.
Yeah, and another option is memorial gardens. We don't have one here at St. Peter's, but my last parish did. And that is a place where there is a garden and the ashes are poured into a hole in the ground, not without an urn. And within a month or two, they're completely woven into the soil, and then names are put on a plaque. For some folks, being conscious of the environment, that's something that appeals to them, is leaving nothing to mar the earth after they have passed away. And
we had, back at St. Anne's Annapolis, we had a memorial garden too. And that's a very attractive thing for many people, and it can, I think that as people are more conscious of environmental and ecological concerns, that can be very attractive. All right, so let's talk about why would you choose cremation? And I think the first one is, and I hear this very much at the hospital, is you may hold the belief that it's better to honor the memory of the person and not a dead body. And it's a interesting place to stop and think about, because honestly, I find a lot of people say, well, I don't want a viewing. I don't want a viewing. I want to remember the person as they are. I've seen a shift as far as saying, whether it's a closed casket or whether they are cremated, prior to the service. And I know here we have had services here as well as other places because they don't want that body displayed. And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
So.
You may believe that the cremated body becomes one with nature more quickly. And obviously, whether you're talking a memorial garden or scattering the ashes or distributing the ashes in the sea or wherever, it obviously is more connected to the earth and quicker than a body would decompose in the ground in a casket within a vault.
Yeah, and I've also found people who are severely claustrophobic in this life, and the thought of their full body being under the earth is almost too much for them to bear. And so they want to make sure that they are well and truly dead before the ashes are placed someplace. And so, choosing cremation for them is something that's important. It's a very personal choice.
It goes back to those values again, which is what we keep coming back to. And I will say, for me, cremation not only was my mom's example, but for me, it was the worms that got me. I just couldn't get past worms. Yeah. All right. Cremation may be traditional in your family or your this current area that you live in. You may prefer the body to be returned quickly and cleanly to the elements. And you may have environmental concerns, and that we're going to talk a little bit about eco-friendly options in just a minute. And you may have concern about the use of valuable land, or you feel it's wrong to fill the ground with materials that won't erode, because there is very much a lot with caskets being steel and other pieces that will not erode and actually tarnish the earth with toxins.
Yeah.
And you may want to keep costs down. Now, the cost associated with that, it doesn't mean you're not necessarily going to have an inexpensive funeral, because a funeral has its own piece to it, but it's not as costly generally of purchasing a casket and all.
A plot or a niche or whatever.
Right, exactly. But you might increase your cost by picking an expensive casket beforehand or for the viewing. You may want to have your remains buried in the ground or placed in a columbarium. Again, there's a cost associated with that. You may choose an expensive urn. I've had a number of patients tell me their loved one, they have picked out something. I had someone that had a pottery business, and it was very important to her that she would end up in one of her pots. So her family said, then we are going to select the pot that she created, and she was going to rest forever in that, which is really kind of a beautiful thought. Any of these choices, however, are going to bring up the cost to a traditional funeral. All right. Choices to think about with cremation. Who's going to do it? There are handouts that are associated with this week that, this week and next week, but in there is if you printed those off, you will see that there is funeral homes listed. There's also direct crematoriums that will just do cremation. So you can skip going to Parcells and go to a direct crematorium.
But in this area, Parcell actually owns the crematorium that you go to, so you're going to them anyway. But all of the funeral homes in this community are very reputable and very fair-minded and wonderful to work with.
And I'm going to second that, because I do a lot of work with them from the hospital base. And whether it's Nelson's, whether it's Benny Short is fabulous. I mean, they're all respectful of the remains. They are also respectful of the people and the families.
Yeah, I have not had a bad experience with a funeral home down here in 16 years, and we've used quite a few. So.
Yeah, so good to know, actually. Whether you want to distribute the remains, you're going to be making that choice, whether you're going to give them like my family did, my father did, and distribute them to family members, whether you want to take them somewhere very specific. Some areas do have laws prohibiting the scattering and require a permit, so you'll have to check on that. There are, and again, scattering at sea, we're going to talk about that as an eco-friendly thing, but it does require certain specifics that go along with that. You may want to reflect on the places that were especially loved by the deceased, which means for my mom, it was going back to the Catskill Mountains, regardless. For others, it could be their childhood home. It could be any possible reason that they would go somewhere else. And
it's important also, I think, to say that when a body is cremated, there is a basic container that the crematorium will provide for the body. Typically, I've seen some that are plastic, but down here, most of them are cardboard. Mm-hmm. You can just use that. Will go back to the earth. Some people want an urn because it's a pottery that they made or something like that. But you need not necessarily spend a great deal of money if you want to honor their person by honoring their earth and helping them go back into creation, which is a pretty powerful theological statement, actually.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to take a breath here before we move into talking a little bit about the Episcopal Church and talk about environmental friendly ideas. And mainly because we do know that cremation there's good and bad to everything that we do, and we've learned a lot through our history here. While some people assume that cremation is a greener option, a single cremation uses as much gas and electricity as a 500-mile road trip. And a traditional burial can be very harmful to the environment because they use a significant number of materials such as steel and lumber, and concrete,
formaldehyde, chemicals,
embalming, and all of that can seep back into the earth. And if you have any concerns about your legacy leaving behind for the people that are left behind, then that can be very powerful to consider.
I think in this case, it's one of the very famous Episcopalians was Robin Williams. And he said, no matter what you believe as an Episcopalian, there's at least another Episcopalian who will agree with you. And in this case, again, we're talking about personal values and things that are important to us. In our church, one of the things that we say all the time is all can, some should, none must. All of us can choose different options. Some of us should choose particular options for particular reasons, but none of us must choose one of these or the other. There's a great deal of freedom. At a funeral, the job of at the funeral is to celebrate a person's life and to give God thanks for that life. There is no magic trick that I or any of the other clergy know that somehow or another gets somebody ahead of the line into getting into the kingdom of God. That's not how that works at all. But really, funerals are for the living, and that's an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate the person's life and make meaning of their passing and their death. So when you're contemplating which one of these you choose, this is your personal decision to make. This is your personal personal decision and choice. And the church is here to support you in helping you make that decision. And I and all of the
or natural environmental friendly ideas first. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the unique or more strange and unusual ones. All right. So a natural burial is known as a green burial, is one of the most eco-friendly options you can have. And some people wonder why embalming is bad. Well, a natural burial does not use embalming fluid or a large amount of wood or steel. The body's wrapped in natural fibers. It goes linen. There's no casket. There's no urn. There's no concrete, brass, anything. It just goes into the ground and decomposes naturally. That's the greenest one that we've got. The second one that is becoming very popular, I personally think this is wonderful, is the tree of life cremation burial. And again, this is, although we know that the body's being cremated, and using a lot of energy, etc. A tree of life burial, the ashes are mixed with the soil, and a tree or shrub is planted with that to make it a living memorial, which I think is, I mean, it's beautiful.
Mhm.
You can't do it in your backyard, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Legally, you cannot do it in your backyard.
Okay, but it's a good option. You have to do a little bit more research as far as where and when, and that there is information out there that you can
I
get.
believe we have one person interred up at Pilot Town Cemetery who chose that option. And so when they came in, the cemetery committee chose where to place the tree in relationship, and that's what
I love
that's how they
that.
were interred. So there is a small plaque on the tree
Oh,
that commemorates their life.
I like that very much. All right. The scattering ashes at sea is probably the most well-known method of scattering cremation ashes. While it is permitted, many regulations need to be followed, starting with ensuring that the ashes are scattered a specific distance from land in nautical miles. And again, you now know, and my secret that I didn't follow that.
I'm sure you were far enough off.
I'm
to
sure.
see. I'm sure you made sure that was the case.
Indeed.
For anybody watching at home, she made sure that was the case.
Exactly.
I assure you. But there are headboats here in Lewes, actually, that will take families out to do this option, and the funeral home can let you know how far you have to go off.
Well, and it's very cool because it gives you an option for a small gathering.
Yes.
And people can be together, the
Yep.
family can be together and be part of that
Yep.
distribution, which is a beautiful way to have a funeral. And that doesn't eliminate you as a priest.
And I've gone out with many of them, actually.
Okay.
So the important thing about interment, though, in those situations is location, location, location. If you are going to scatter the ashes, make sure you're not downwind. So
Okay. Now,
I know this from experience.
all right. There is also the memorial wreath installation, and this is another one of my favorites also. And this type of burial service, it takes the deceased remains into an undersea memorial garden. The cremated remains are integrated with a concrete reef ball. It's an artificial reef module that mimics the natural reef structure and function, and submerged, environmentally approved ocean locations. There are over 6,000 memorial reefs currently deployed worldwide, and it supports marine life by increasing biomass in marine nourishing areas that have been adversely impacted by the climate change, pollutions, and overfishing. Fabulous idea as far as to be able to do that. Those are the more common environmentally friendly options. There are a few that are just a little bit different. Unusual. And again, it doesn't mean that I find them unusual, but somebody else, their values might find them very intriguing. I'm just going to list them off and let you ponder them. The number one of them is the mushroom burial suit. And the creator of this creates a pair of what we call ninja pajamas that are filled with mushroom spores that will consume the dead body. That's one. Just, you gotta think about that. I gotta take a minute on that one. Okay.
You always did like salad.
Okay. Second one would be aquamation, which is a water cremation. And it is alkaline hydrolysis, and the body's placed in a steel vessel, and it's filled with a solution, 95% water and 5% potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide. And the combination destroys the body down into, it takes about 20 hours to get in, and all that's left is the skeleton. And then those can be that is ground up to a white powder, and the remains are given out. So it is not as environmentally impacted as a cremation, which has the energy putting out to that. This actually happens naturally.
Yep. which was actually harkens back to an ancient tradition for Christians. If you've ever been to Paris or to Rome, the city of the dead or the necropolis, you'll find that they would do this. They would break the bodies down, and then the skeletons themselves would be assembled in elaborate crypts and chapels that are actually underneath, that people can tour to this day.
Wow.
And in Ireland, frequently what would happen was they would bury the body in a pine wood casket, and then after 50 years, they would open the casket or open the grave up and reuse it for the next generation. So that you just bury them on top as it goes back to the earth.
Wow.
So they did know something in the past.
Yeah,
I think
I
about
guess.
caring for the body and caring for the earth.
Yeah, exactly. Another option is donating your body to science,
Mhm.
whether that is to, and generally that has to be established. I can tell you firmly about that in the hospital. If that is something that is important to you and you want your body donated to science, you need to do that well in advance and sign up. Some of the educational institutions will take that, but you can't make a decision today and have them take it tomorrow.
Right.
So this has to be set up in advance for that.
Mhm.
Another one is body farms. And of course, the thought of this became very popular with all the shows, CSI. This was a method, you could donate your body to a body farm for medical and
forensic research.
Yeah.
So they would learn how the body breaks down and how to, so that when other bodies are found, they could gauge what happened to it. So,
And how long ago that person died and all that. It's a huge win for the detectives and the scientists alike. You can donate that. There are 7 currently operating in the United States, and more will be coming, I'm sure.
Mhm.
In Tibet and other places, and Father Jeff and I were chatting about this earlier, there is something called the sky burial. And what this ritual is meant to encourage good karma for the Buddhist. And the body is laid out on a mountaintop and allowed to be consumed by the birds and animals of the nature, because it is a return of meat to meat.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Back to the creation,
Yes.
circle of life,
Yes.
as it were.
You're not going to say anything more about that
Nope.
one? No? Okay. All right.
It's a deeply personal decision, and people have different reasons for making the selections that they do.
Exactly. There is also body composting or recomposition, which could very possibly turn into the future of green burial once it's legal. Right now it is not. They came up with this idea that you could use the body, which farmers have done in the past with animals, deceased animals, that they would go back to the earth, and that nourishes the earth and
With nutrients and the components of the body,
exactly.
the elements of the body.
Right. So that's not, to the best of my knowledge, it's not legal yet, but that is probably coming around the corner as we move forward. The last one is, and again, if you watch any of these science shows or whatever, bog bodies. And in Ireland, and Jeff is probably going to be able to say more about this, but bodies that go into a bog become mummified and naturally. And
it can be dug up hundreds of years later and still well preserved, as long as they're not exposed to the oxygen because of the way the body breaks down.
Yeah.
Or doesn't break down in this case.
Yeah, and I think that it's been, that whole idea has been used for a lot of murder mystery stories, what happened to the person and things, because they were walking in the bog and
Found somebody.
Okay.
Most often today, when that is found, the bodies are actually hundreds of years old, not recent.
Yeah, we hope that anyway.
Yeah, please God.
Yeah, it's okay. All right, we're going to go back and we're going to step into the Episcopal Church just a little bit. And fortunately, we have an expert here with me. But we're going to talk as far as the one thing that Father Jeff said earlier is that cremation does not deny the possibility of resurrection according to our theological stance. And that is it's acceptable in the Episcopal Church. In the Book of Common Prayer on page 468, if you want to look it up, it is very specific that it would be, I just got to get down to the sentences. Where is it? 468, service to be in. Well, 468, if I can find this.
While she's looking, it's basically the thought that if God can make our bodies in the first place, God can remake our bodies into whatever it needs to be in the next life. So it is not essential for us to maintain the state of the body in one form or another, because we believe that we return to God and to the nearer presence of God at the point of death.
Well, and it's also, and I think some of that is baptized, Christians are supposed to be buried from the church. You're supposed to come to the church. And that's one of the things that you guys have, this wonderful, wonderful booklet that is a fantastic guide, which is a lot of the material that we went over today is from this. This that St. Peter's has put together is absolutely fantastic. It includes not only reading materials, not only Psalms, hymnal choice, so it's everything in here. So part of that is the fact that we are Christians and it's a deeply personal choice, and the priests and deacons are here to support that choice.
Yeah. The saddest thing in the world for me as a priest that happens again and again, in fact, it just happened recently, is when a member of the parish passes away and they have not left their wishes. Mm-hmm. When I was a young curate at my first parish, I remember being shocked one day to come in and find a FedEx delivery from California with a note inside that said, "Please bury Mom." The family didn't even come back to put the body in the graveyard. And when people don't leave their wishes, then their wishes are left up to the interpretation of those who are left. Frequently their family, and sometimes their family doesn't share their religious values. Mm-hmm. Sometimes their family doesn't share the desire to do the things that that the deceased person would do. And so in this case recently, a person died. She kept telling me that she wanted to plan her service, but would never talk to me about it. And her family's decided not to do a service. Wow. And so her church family really has no way to recognize and celebrate her life afterwards. Right. The second thing I would say about funerals is funerals are not supposed to be an opportunity to go into a great deal of debt. That is not in any way a part of the teachings of the church, nor is it an opportunity for people to show how much they really love someone or to make up for any past problems that they and the deceased may have had. The important value, I think, for regardless of what decision you make, is what honors the person's wishes and what honors the person's memory. So, you don't need to buy a $10,000 casket because you're making up for, a fight that you had with the person 20 years ago or something like that. That really isn't, and nobody's going to see the casket anyway. When you bring it into the church, whether it's a casket or an urn or the cardboard box they give you the ashes in, it's always covered with a pall, because the church wants you to understand and wants to teach that we are all the same before God, that regardless of the wealth that we have or don't have in this life, when we come before God, we are all equally God's children, and there's no differentiation, male, female, rich, poor, regardless of race or economic background or even orientation. So those are really two things, personally as the priest, I really want to say to you for St. Peter's is, please make your wishes known. If you haven't already, please send me an email and I will be happy to send you this either by mail or by email so that you can fill it out. It's not just the wishes about your service, but it is also a good thing that you can give to your executor that answers basic questions so they know what to do in the next step. Yeah. You don't have to give us a copy back. If you give us a copy back, then I can go to the family and say, well, this is what Gladys wanted and this is what she told me. The traditional readings are here in, that are recommended by the prayer book, but they are by no means exclusive. So for instance, one of the ones that's popularly chosen for funerals is 1 Corinthians 13, St. Paul's great teaching about love that we frequently have at weddings. It's very common for a grieving spouse to pick and want to recall that from their wedding. Even though it's not the one suggested by the prayer book, we're very much willing to, take another scriptural suggestion that you may have. But please make your wishes known, and please don't try to set yourself into debt or remove assets from your heirs and those that you want to support with what's left of your estate by spending it all on things that nobody is going to see in the long term.
And that, Father Jeff, you brought up a very important point that, we started with, 3 weeks ago, is the reason we're talking about this, the reason that these sessions are here is to be able to communicate with your family so they understand your values, your wishes. And it is very important. It doesn't stop with just making that advance directive. It is also, let's take it all the way through. You've got it done, it's done, you don't have to think about it, and you know that you are going to be honored because you've had the discussion and you've communicated your needs and your desires with your family members. I think also in here, just let me confirm because I'm sure it was. In this, and somebody brought it up in the class that we taught at the other church, is that there are some kits, I guess, or notebooks that are available, like Staples and things like that, that they taught, and I can't remember the name the gentleman used on it, but this Father Jeff's book is really comprehensive. It has things like your websites, it has things like passwords, it has things like insurance. All of these pieces your family member needs at the end of life. Yep. And it's really important that you walk from the start of this program to the end and start filling this out. And once you've got it done, there's a sense of relief, that you've done what you need to do in order to honor your family. We love our families and we want to do right by them also.
Yeah, and the electronic footprint is really something that most people don't think about. We have a member of the parish, actually, whose spouse passed away and did not disclose their Facebook password to their spouse. So every year, people around the world that were related to this person put happy birthday up on his birthday, but he's now been dead for 7 years, and the spouse doesn't have a way to go back and let those people know that her husband is dead, nor can she, make the account defunct. It doesn't happen automatically. So on Facebook and other apps, you can now designate a survivor that if someone hasn't logged into your account in so long, that person gets access to your account and continue to manage it in your memory.
Which is fabulous.
So, there's also, I know Parcell has a program where some people are actually getting QR codes scanned onto the gravestone, so that when you go to the cemetery now, you can scan that with your phone and it will take you to a website that pops up pictures that the person may wanted to pass on, or things that the person wrote or poems that were important to them. You can actually make a virtual page that people can access when they go to visit your grave.
Do you know, I did not know that, and that's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
It's
kind of cool when you think about it,
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Now, how long that will be maintained after, in 200 years, I'm not sure the website will still be there. But.
So the bottom line is, it's a deeply personal choice that you're making here for all of these things. There's no right or wrong answer. I, of course, was smiling as I was talking about the mushroom soup, and it may be something very important to you, and I apologize for my frivolity. However, these choices are personal. Yep. And it can be very difficult to get to this point to talk about it, but that's why we're talking about it week after week after week, to make it the normative. And it was interesting because I was in a meeting just recently, and it came up again that our culture does not want to talk about death. We want to deny death in every piece, but we are Christians, and Jesus walks beside us all, and we are resurrection people. And so this is just this part is part of life.
It's part of our journey towards Christ.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the program for today. If you have questions, or if you have something you want to share, if you've had an experience, good or bad, with this, we're happy to take those comments. Again, next week is a heavy duty, lots and lots of material that will be helpful for everyone. So if there's anything we can answer, or happy to do so.
Anybody raise your hand or wave back and forth and unmute yourself, and we'll be ready to answer